Okay, 45 minutes on the clock. So if you've got your own watch as well, if you want, there we go. Okay, let's see. Hello everybody, I'm here to talk to you about the solution for Flowers Racing. They're an adventure racing company that operates in a number of regions across the world, and they're looking to expand. They are going to make use of Salesforce to replace some of their existing systems, streamline their operation, and be able to collaborate much better. They're currently located in America and the EU. They're looking to expand into South America and Asia. I've identified a risk in reading the requirements. It's stated that there's a limited budget, and the success of the continued rollout hinges on the first deliverable, which is to deliver into North America. So we'll take that into consideration when we look at the implementation approach and the governance. It's also going to be a multi-language, a multi-currency implementation, but I recommend that we adopt a single org approach in terms of the Salesforce implementation. There's a number of processes that we'll get into, but first of all, let's start with the actors and licenses. So we have internal and external users that we need to accommodate within the system. So first of all, there's a general public user. This will be for anonymous access through the public website. So we will need one Salesforce license for this anonymous user. Then internally we have our territory race coordinator, our TRC. These are really the operators of the races. They will require Service Cloud. We have a territory route leader, TRL. They are the planners of the races. They also require Service Cloud and a license. We have regional managers, RMs, responsible for the employees reporting to them, and also the charity relationships within their region. They'll also need a Service Cloud. And we have customer support, CS, who will need to make use of Service Cloud and also Live Agent in order to interact with the racers. So these are our internal users here. We also have our external users. These are our racers. There's approximately 200 to 250,000 of those based on existing data that we have. They're going to require a customer community license. We have charity personnel. So these are the people who work at the charity partners managed by the regional manager. It's not explicitly clear within the scenario, but I've estimated that there's approximately 800 of those per region. They'll require a partner community license. And then finally, we have adventure trackers. These are people who work within the regions who are contracted to help with the organization of the race. They'll also require a partner community license. No explicit number on that. Okay, in terms of how these people are organized, we'll need a role hierarchy within Salesforce. So this will be distributed across the 6 or 7 regions across the globe, but it follows the same pattern. So at the top we have the CEO, and across then their different regions, they will have a regional manager. So this is the regional manager for North America, and a regional manager for the EU, So those are the existing regions they work in, but they are looking to expand, but it will be the same structure. And then reporting to a regional manager, we have a number of different territories. So in the case of North America, we have East Coast, Midwest, and West Coast. And then within those territories, we have our territory route leaders and our territory race coordinators. And that's the same across there. In terms of the relationships with the external users, so we have our charity contacts with the partner community. Those accounts will be managed by the regional manager in the region. So there will be the charity partner accounts. And they also will require partner roles of at least 2 levels. And then we also have the adventure trackers. I've given those a partner license. Those accounts will need to be managed by the territory race coordinator within that region. So they will have the adventure tracker accounts. No need for additional roles on that. So that's the actors and licenses. In terms of the systems that are involved, we have a number of existing systems, as well as the Salesforce system that we will need to be implementing. So first of the existing systems is the existing race databases. So these have grown organically, and so we have a number of legacy systems, and these are looking to be retired. We have a tracker database. This is used to report the information from the RFID trackers which are worn by the racers on race day. This system will be retained in the future state. We have an external system for adventure trackers. This is a logistics system which takes care of shipping race numbers and RFID tags to the racers, so that will need to also be retained. We also have the International Association of Adventure Racers, which is a cloud-hosted database of races and race results. And this will also be retained in the future system. So we're looking to migrate the data from the racer DBs into Salesforce. So we'll be looking to retire and migrate. In order to do that, we will make use of ETL product in order to migrate the data ultimately into Salesforce.
Sorry, I don't know that.
Alexa doesn't know that. In terms of having Salesforce communicate with the systems that we're going to retain, our TrackerDB, our Adventure Trackers, and our IARA, I propose to make use of a cloud-hosted ESB. And as we look at each of the integrations that are required in the system, we can talk about the way in which we'll make use of the ESB in terms of choreography, orchestration, protocol adapter, etc. I made the assumption that the existing databases that will be retained will be accessible likely hosted on cloud, so the tracker DB likely hosted on public cloud. Likewise, the event trackers, if it's not cloud hosted, at least it's accessible for us. In terms of the on-prem systems, we have a payment system called DashPay. We have Active Directory for employee credentials and profiles, and there's also an LDAP store, which is used in a couple of different ways for charity partners. It holds their profile and credentials, and it can also be used for racers who don't wish to register using a social account. In order to connect that with Salesforce, we propose the use of a cloud IDAM, for example, Okta, and this will take care of the user provisioning between both Active Directory and Salesforce and the LDAP store and Salesforce, and it will also be able to authenticate our logins for the required users through the use of SAML. We have a couple of other systems involved. So there's a requirement for social sign-on. So that will be a system within the landscape. So Facebook, Twitter, etc. There is the existing public website. And our racers will be able to access through both a custom mobile app or through their browser. In terms of data, so the system generates a large amount of data. We will have need of a data warehouse for archiving off of Salesforce. And there's a number of reporting requirements which have specific requirements around ad hoc and historical reporting. So I'm proposing the use of a additional BI analytics product in order to report over large volumes of data. The data warehouse will be integrated via the ETL process. Depending on the BI product that's selected, it could be directly connected to the data warehouse and or Salesforce, or make use of the ETL. Okay, let's look at the data model. So I mentioned that there's large volumes of data. This exists in several different areas. We have, first of all, Salesforce account object, which will hold several different record types. So we will have our racers. These records will be owned by the racers will be owned by our territory race coordinators. We have our charities partners. These will be owned by the regional manager. And we will also have our adventure trackers. And these will be owned by our TRCs. In order to support this, I'll make use of record types to differentiate between those different types of accounts. There's also a requirement that racers are able to select their preferred charity. So we will have a self-referring lookup, a custom lookup field, which will allow record types of type racer to select a record from the charity record type. In terms of the race itself, this will be a custom object. It will be owned by our TRL, our territory route leader. Sharing will be private. The territory route leader is responsible for laying out the race and capturing waypoints using a mobile app. So this will be another custom object at the end of a master detail relationship in order to capture the waypoints. I'll just talk more about that specific requirement in a moment. During the planning phase, the territory route leader is the only person who has access to the race, but they will then need to open that up to the territory race coordinator. So this will be achieved through the use of a custom lookup field to the user object in order to establish which TRC is associated or is responsible for operating a particular race. That will be a lookup relationship. In terms of the race entry itself, there'll be a junction object, which is also a custom object called race entry. This is going to require attention from the point of view of large data volume. The race entry itself will be owned by the TRC and it will be private. It will be related to the race by a lookup relationship and to the account also by a lookup relationship. In terms of the charitable donations, there's one more custom object which I've called pledge. These can be created in a number of different ways, either by supporters of the racer or by the race, the company itself in terms of a match giving requirement. This will be a master detail relationship, and it also presents us with a large data volume. In terms of the numbers for those, accounts for racers per region, we're thinking about 250,000. So we're currently in 2 regions, but expanding more. So we're looking upwards probably of a couple of million racer accounts. In terms of charity, there's approximately 400 of those. No details on the adventure trackers. In terms of our large data volumes though, for our pledges, this is the big one. We have potential of 5 million per region per year. And our race entries, 100,000 per region per year. So across multiple regions and bearing in mind the desire to retain and report over data, there's certainly potential for large data volume in this area. There's one more lookup relationship, and that is that a particular pledge for a particular racer's race entry can be associated with a particular charity account. So this again will be a custom lookup relationship for the charity. So that's an overview that's an overview of the systems and users. Let's take a look at the requirements. So we have business processes around race planning, race registration, tracking, charity pledges, and customer support. So looking on page 5 at the race planning and racer registration. So the first requirement says that they would really like to have a single system. So this is a requirement that supports the preference for a single Salesforce org. So in terms of the process related to the creation of a new race. So this will be conducted by the territory route leader. They're going to make use of the Salesforce One mobile app in order to walk the route and capture the coordinates of each of the waypoints. So the way that this will be achieved is that the race record will be created and owned by them, and only they will have access to it along with their manager, which is achieved through the role hierarchy. When they reach a particular waypoint, they will open the page, or they will open the app and navigate to the waypoint page. That will allow some custom JavaScript on the page in order to access the GPS and capture the latitude and longitude into custom fields within the waypoint custom object. The waypoint needs to be assigned a number. This will be achieved through an auto number custom field. And then once satisfied, they need to submit the race and then associate it with the appropriate race coordinator. So this will be achieved through our custom lookup and through a status field on a custom pick this field on the race object. In terms of allowing the territory route leader to have ad hoc reporting, so this will be achieved through custom report types. It's not particularly clear in the requirements as to what sort of reports they're looking for. If needs be, we can make use of additional custom objects to summarize information that they could report over in order to improve the reporting performance over time. In terms of access to the information, this is all standard functionality that will be accessible through the Salesforce One mobile app, so that will be usable by all of our internal users. Racers are able to set up a profile and register for the registration portal. So first of all, they will need to create an account in order to be able to access the community. So this will be achieved through use of a social sign-on with a authentication provider for the appropriate social platforms, and then a custom Apex registration handler in order to create the racer account record within Salesforce. So then we have an integration requirement. So at the point of registration, we need to make a call out to the IARA website in order to try and locate the user, the racer, and if we are able to find them, return their IARA number. So this will be achieved through a request response integration. So I would propose, since there is no immediate time constraint on this, making use of an outbound message within Salesforce which will target an endpoint in the ESB. This will give us the ability then to adjust the protocol to talk to the IARA service, which is able to support either cloud or REST, so we can build that integration. The ESB will then receive the response from the website. The ESB allows us to mediate the call, so if the website, the IARA website is unavailable, the ESB can retry. Once we have got the response, then the ESB is going to update Salesforce using the standard REST API in order to update the racer account record with their racer number. In order to access the Salesforce REST API, the ESB will need an active session. This would be achieved by use of a connected app, which uses OAuth authentication in order to allow the ESB to log in, and that would be a OAuth web server flow. So that's the first integration. Then returning to page 5, the last couple of requirements. They'd like to minimize the creation of duplicate racer records. So at the point of registration, the racer will be presented with a list of possible matches. I would highlight here that there is a risk around data privacy, so we would need to validate if that was appropriate. But it could be achieved using a custom Lightning component on the community, which is able to make use of an Apex controller without sharing to look for matching or partial matching existing racer accounts based on first name, last name, or email address, and then that information can be presented to the registering racer in order for them to select an existing account which may exist. Final requirement on page 5 is the ability to search for upcoming races. So again, this can be achieved. And this is a requirement which they need to be able to search using the custom mobile app. So custom mobile app is required because they've expressed a desire to download it via the App Store. So they're looking for strong branding on that. In order to be able to access Salesforce, we will again have a connected app configuration, and the mobile SDK will need to be used in order to perform a OAuth user agent flow to establish a session. Once a session has been established, it will be possible then to call for it will be possible to call it'll be possible to make a REST request with a no, actually, I think the way this needs to be done is with Apex REST. So the Apex class will need to operate without sharing because we have races being listed as private. So we'll need to have a custom Apex class which implements an Apex REST interface, and this could then be called from the mobile app. Okay, turning now to page 6. Looking at the time. Well, we only have 15 minutes left. Okay, so page 6. We've got some requirements around the limitations for the capacity of the race. So only 5,000 race entries are allowed per race. This could be achieved through the use of custom Apex declarative lookup, roll-up summary, for example, because this is a lookup relationship. We don't have a straight roll-up summary available, so it would need to be programmatic. The total would then be stored in a custom field on the race entry, and once the magic 5,000 is reached, then the status of the race record will be updated through a process. In terms of the racer registration, a racer should be able to specify some details about their competition level. This will be achieved through a custom field, and then pay the registration fee. So the registration fee will need to be collected through DashPay. In order to achieve this, we need to go through a number of steps. In order to remain compliant with PCI, we don't want to be storing credit card details within Salesforce. So we'll need to have an integration with a hosted payment page that's available within DashPay. So if the user is registering on either their mobile app or their browser, this could be achieved through the use of an iframe in order to capture the information. We would also have, and then once the payment has been collected, DashPay will need to make a call via the ESB to Salesforce in order to store the payment token information against the racer's account in order that it can be used in the future. Let's see, where do we get to? Okay. Racers selecting their default charity pledges, that would just be a custom field via the lookup relationship on their account. Upon successful registration, they have the opportunity, or we will check to see whether or not they've raced more than 5 times in the past 2 years. So this is a need for integration with the IARA database. Upon registration, we will make a call out again via the ESB. So I would again, this is not it's not time dependent, so it could be made use of through an outbound message targeting the ESB. That will then query the IARA system in order to find out how many times somebody's raced, and then the update of that could go back into the Salesforce account record for the racer. We could then have a process fire which would create an email offering to put them into one of the Premier Start groups with other elite racers. There's an additional requirement with this, which is, as an incentive, the racing company would like to match the total pledge amount for all racers that participate in a Premier race. So this would need to happen after the race has been completed, and when it is closed, we would then make use of Batch Apex in order to total up all of the pledges which have been made, and then an additional pledge record could be written on behalf of the racing company to achieve the matched pledge amount. Racers should be able to ask questions in forums, so this would be achieved through the Salesforce community. So this degree of interaction in terms of what's currently termed the public website leads me to propose that the existing public website would be retired and migrated into the Salesforce community. And in that way, we can provide a more integrated experience through the use for knowledge sharing through the use of Salesforce knowledge and files. In terms of the multi-language requirement, the files would need to be translated and uploaded in the appropriate languages. And we could have multiple knowledge articles in the appropriate languages. In terms of cancellation, so we have another integration this time which involves a transaction which is initiated on Salesforce, whereby a racer decides to cancel. The amount that they get refunded will be dependent on the status of their current order. So within the Adventure Trackers logistics system, we may or may not have already shipped their BIB and RFID. If we have, we only give them half of the refund, which will need to be returned through the DashPay system. So the way in which this would be achieved would be to make use of the ESB for the choreography and orchestration of the call. So first of all, the cancellation request would be initiated from Salesforce. This would be achieved through Apex Web Service callout, and made the assumption that the cancellation is going to happen in real time, and the user wants to ultimately see a response and a confirmation of the cancellation and how much they would be refunded. So therefore, it would be an Apex callout to the ESB. The ESB is then going to check the status of the order with Adventure Trackers, and then based on whether or not the order has shipped, it will then place the refund request with DashPay. Once the refund has been confirmed, it would cancel the order within the Adventure Tracker system and then return the response to Salesforce. In terms of the user experience, it would need to be a custom component which is connected to an Apex controller, and the Apex controller would then call a class which did the web service call out. Okay, looking at racer tracking and charity pledges on page 6. There needs to be a publicly accessible website. So this would be a page from the Salesforce community which makes use of our anonymous user license, and it will allow people to do a number of things. So in order to meet the requirements, we are going to need a number of custom components. We'll need a search component which is able to call an Apex controller which will operate without sharing in order to be able to perform SQL queries over the race entry object in order to locate racers who have signed up. We will need a custom map component in order to display the race location and also during the race, the race's current position. The information from this will come from geolocation fields on the race entry object, which are updated from the tracker system through an additional integration. We will need a pledge component, which will require an integration with DashPay in order to connect to collect the payment amount. And I propose that the integration with DashPay would be a UI mashup achieved through a Canvas connected app that would be configured within Salesforce, and in that way is accessible through a custom component hosting the Canvas iframe. In terms of the pledges, so there's 5 million pledges each racer typically receives 50 pledges per race, so this is an area which needs to be managed with a data management strategy. So I would propose that the pledge information would be moved out to the data warehouse through an ETL process soon after the completion of the race. In terms of race time, so drop my mic, it's going to be bad. In terms of race time, we need to have a requirement to update the racer's location in near real time. In terms of near real time, I've made the assumption that we will do this every minute, and that Salesforce will store the current and previous location of the racer. So this will require an integration. From the TrackerDB. So the way that I see this working is the TrackerDB will target our ESB with the updates that it has on whatever frequency. So if this is taking place in absolute real time, then we can use the ESB in order to batch up the updates that we have. Every minute, the ESB will update Salesforce through the REST API, targeting a platform event. That platform event will be subscribed to by an Apex trigger, and that Apex trigger will be able to take the JSON payload within the platform event and process a number of updates at a time. We can make use of Apex queuables in order to remain within governor limits if there is a very high volume, given that we've got 5,000 racers. Okay, so that is, lost my page. Okay, so that's the race tracking. In terms of the requirements around logistics, so turning to page 7, we have an integration described here in terms of a shipment request being created and passed to the Adventure Tracker system in order that they will the request for the bib number and radio frequency disk. So in terms of this shipment request, Salesforce will make use of an outbound message targeting, again, the ESB, and that will then place the order with the Adventure Tracker's system. Once we've received the results from that call, it's not clear from the requirements whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, but the ESB will again be able to call a platform event within Salesforce with the information of the order, and this will give us the flexibility to modify over time the process that's involved on receipt of that information. So I would anticipate that once the order has been placed, that the race entry record would need to be updated with the bib number and the ID of the RFID tag for the racer. But given that this will be a project which looks to replace multiple systems and move over time, the use of a platform event allows us to evolve those processes. Okay, I think we've done the check-in. Okay, so looking at the charity and reporting requirements. So in terms of charities wanting to access or to join in the process of the race company, they need to be able to apply through the web or through email. And then there then follows a qualification and verification process. So I would propose that we make use of web to case or email to case in order to achieve this. So within the data model, we also need to add cases. Well, was that really 45 minutes?
It blows past, doesn't it?
Yep.
Okay, I got to page 7 of 10. This is always a great scenario for people, isn't it? He said.
You want to take a couple minutes and grab a drink and stuff like that?
I'm just wetting my whistle now, but thank you. Yeah. Gosh, this is a hard one, isn't it?
It is, and there's just a lot to it. It's very meaty.
Okay. Well, if you're ready, I'm ready when you're ready, and we can synchronize timers.
Melissa and Gavin, you both ready?
Yep.
Yep.
All right.
All right, I'll kick us off. So at the very beginning, you had outlined that you were going with a single org strategy. And just with that in mind, I would like to understand 2 separate areas. The first one, kind of what your idea is for supporting various regulations, such as different tax codes in different countries when you roll out to Europe in 12 months. And then number 2, just how you're going to address some of the data volumes as you have more regions.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think that the considerations here are really balancing the request for standardization and streamlining, and as well looking to have a successful first rollout, as well as the multi-language, multi-currency requirements. So the way that I see this working in terms of the multi-language, multi-currency is in a couple of ways. We can use the standard features in terms of being able to collect payments for users from different currencies. In terms of the reporting over that, we can make use of exchange rates if they want to do central reporting in dollars or euros. In terms of different tax amounts, I think this could be achieved really just through the use of an additional custom object with the appropriate custom object or custom settings with the appropriate sales tax amounts. If it does turn out that it is overly laborious or overly problematic to deal with this, then perhaps we could look at the use of additional financial software, but I think it could be handled adequately through the use of a custom object. In terms of the data volumes, so we have 2 areas of concern primarily, which is the race entry and the pledge. In terms of the life cycle of these, I think what we need to balance is what are the operational needs in terms of planning and running the race, and then the reporting requirements, which are stated here. The way I propose to deal with that is soon after the race is completed, I would be looking to move the pledge information off and into a data warehouse. I think we also have an opportunity then to give consideration to data protection and GDPR requirements. So in terms of the personally identifiable information here that we have, we may not need to keep that. We might just be interested in the financial information. So the ETL process could not only move that data off platform, but also anonymize it as well.
For the race entry, can you remind me what your projections are for the data size?
So put it somewhere. Sorry. Oh, here it is. Okay, so race entry is, well, there's 20 races per region per year, and then there's 5,000 entries per race. So for each region, that would be 100,000. And then each race entry is likely to get 50 pledges. So that would then give us 5 million pledge records per region per year.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess on that note then, so in terms of the 50 million, was it, or 5 million pledge entries, so how do you intend to report on these for example, for the charities running reports on the pledges?
Yeah, so we can add that to the data model. I think that in terms of the kind of the near real-time reporting around how they're doing in relation to a particular pledge, I think an additional custom object, perhaps called pledge summary, and we can use batch Apex in order to each night update the information at a charity account level to give them summaries by race and overall totals. More in-depth reporting would be the responsibility of the BI analytics platform, so the data would be moved off.
And
Sorry,
go ahead.
So one of the things that I was considering, but I didn't get around to going into further in the preparation. I think that there is also an additional, there's an opportunity to make use of Salesforce Connect and OData in order to achieve something similar to this, but for historical information. So we could make historical information available to partner charities, even though it's stored in the data warehouse. We could make use of either an OData connector, perhaps through the data warehouse, or an integration through the ESB. If I just add it to the landscape here directly, and then we could have summary reporting objects exposed as external objects within Salesforce, and then grant access to the charities to those objects.
Okay, I had questions around some of the solution for Dash Pay. So I think on page 6, there was the third requirement where you had suggested that you were going to show Dash Pay through an iframe.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of curious about your thoughts around being able to provide contextual information from Dash Pay within an iframe without cross-site scripting errors.
Yeah, and I in the other payment integration, I did make mention of Canvas, but I didn't do it when I described this one. So I think the solution here is a UI mashup taking place within the user's browser. And if we make use of Salesforce Canvas connected app, that would give us a secure iframe that would allow us to present the hosted payment page from the DashPay server. but also be able to manipulate it and communicate with it through JavaScript through the double iframe of Canvas.
Okay, great. So that'd be.
I have a question pertaining to that. So what would you need to set up that Canvas app with the external system?
Okay, so we would first configure a Salesforce connected app and enable it for Canvas. We would then need to do additional integration around DashPay in order for them to produce a version of their web page, which we could manipulate through JavaScript. In order to do that, it's achieved by way of a side request. So we would have to provide them with the client secret from our connected app in order that they could receive and decode our sign requests and make any responses that they would like to return.
How will Salesforce know where that connected app is? I mean, the Canvas app, sorry.
Yeah, that will be achieved through a custom Lightning component, which will make use of the Canvas component, and then you specify the URL of the, you specify the name of the connected app, the API developer name of the connected app, and then the connected app itself has the endpoint of DashPay configured within it.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
So I see in your data model that you have accounts for racers. Can you provide me just some of the considerations between using consumers and accounts versus person accounts and why you chose accounts?
Yes. So I think I should probably clarify that. I see that the racer accounts would be person accounts, and therefore we would have the shadow contact record that's associated with that in order to achieve that. I think the person accounts are appropriate here for a couple of reasons. First of all, it works well within our community registration model, and then there wasn't really any requirements sort of around a household model in terms of having anybody else. Races are a single entity, so person accounts.
That was actually my question too. So what kind of considerations would you think about when setting those up with the community login and the social sign-on?
So in terms of the registration, that would be achieved through the Apex registration handler, and it's going to create the account contact record and also the user record, and then it would be able to add the contact to the user, and then I think from that point the person account functionality will take care of the rest.
So if what would you do? There's something you would do with the registration handler that's specific for a person account.
Don't know specifically what that is.
So there was a requirement to store the login details for the races in LDAP. Can you just explain to me how you'd achieve that?
Yeah. So I think when we look at the identity solution here, it's a kind of interesting requirement because for the most part they're intending social sign-in to be used, but we want to give people the opportunity. I think the way in which this would be achieved actually is to rationalize the landscape just a little bit and to retire the LDAP store from the on-prem and pass that responsibility over to the cloud IDAM. So Okta would do that very nicely. And then in terms of the point at which the user wants to sign up, so there would need to be a custom integration. So it would be within the community, there would be a custom form which could be achieved through Visual Workflow in order to to capture the information, and then that could create the user and the account and contact record, and then the Okta sync will take care of provisioning that account within the IDAM, and we can then send them their account activation email from there.
Great, thank you.
You also mentioned a custom mobile app. What kind of app will that be?
So the requirement was, the requirement that was stated was that they wanted it to be available in the App Store. There wasn't any requirements that I saw around access to device features. So I think on that basis, it could be a hybrid mobile app. And if I've missed a requirement relating to, I don't know, use of GPS or something like that, then it would need to be fully custom, but I didn't see anything like that. So I would say hybrid.
And for your mobile app, what kind of, you mentioned the user agent flow. Can you draw that?
Yeah, sure. So let's say we've got a user up here wanting to access a protected resource from the mobile app in Salesforce. They don't have an active session. So they would first, from their browser or from the user agent within the browser, so the web browser, within the mobile app, so the web browser there. So the first step would be to contact Salesforce. They would then be redirected. The response would go back to the browser to redirect them. Oh, hold on. Yes, sorry, it would redirect them to the login page. The IDP for the user, if they are using social sign-on, would be Salesforce. So they would come back, the response would go back for them to provide their credentials. They would then submit their credentials, which would be validated by Salesforce. It would make use of the implied grant type. So the response would come back. If it's successful, they would now have an active session, and they would then be able to access the protected resource.
And what would you not want to pass in that request?
So we're making use of user agent flows. So if it's a hybrid app, we can't guarantee that we can protect the client's secret. Therefore, we can only use the implied grant. So we're not going to pass the client's secret. Therefore, we also don't have access to a refresh token. So every time they restart the app or once their session's expired, they will need to log in again.
Okay, thank you.
On a similar note, between the ESB and Salesforce, you mentioned that you were going to use the web server flow to authenticate.
Yeah.
Can you just explain your reasoning behind that choice?
Yeah, so I'm relying on outbound message for several of the integrations. We do have the option to send a session ID there with that request. However, some of these integrations may take a longer period of time than the session. So we need to have the ESB have a reliable way to obtain a session on Salesforce for any of these callbacks into Salesforce, whether it's placing a platform event or using the REST API or whatever. So the web server flow it gives us the opportunity to achieve that because we can obtain a refresh token. So the way in which that would work is that at system initiation, there will need to be an administrative user in possession of the integration user name and password. What they will then do is target an endpoint on the ESB in terms of accessing the protected resource. They will be redirected via their browser to Salesforce. OAuth login endpoint, and the response will come back to present them with their credentials. They can then put in the username and password. That will then be submitted to Salesforce and validated. If it's successful, the response will come back and they will have access code. That access code will then be redirected in a final request to the ESB, and the ESB can extract the contents of that, so extract the code, and then it can make a direct call to the Salesforce authorized endpoint in order to acquire an access token, which is essentially the session token, and also optionally a refresh token, which can then be used when the session expires. And so the ESB is now in possession of everything it needs in order to do its job. And then finally, a response will go back to the web browser confirming that that's done.
Okay, thank you.
You also mentioned making a call out with your Apex class. What would you need to set up for that to work?
Which one was, do you remember which integration that was?
I think it was to check for the racers, see if they exist.
Okay, so I'm proposing to have the Salesforce, all Salesforce integrations go via the ESB. So if we're going to make a call out from Salesforce, we'll need to add an OCIP whitelisting for the ESB.
And what kind of protocol was that?
So that's HTTPS. We have the option to make use of two-way SSL with a digital signature, using an X509 certificate in order to prevent against impersonation as well.
Okay, thank you.
On page 5, I think it's requirement 5, just talking about the territory route leaders, being able to do ad hoc reporting of current and historic race and pledge data. Can you just walk through, given the conversation about using OData to bring that in, is there any concerns about being able to use standard reporting and allowing them to report on historical information?
Yeah, I mean, this was a bit of a general requirement, but you know, I think what it's expressing is that they need to have good reporting capability. So I think that there's a couple of ways that this could be achieved. In terms of the current reports, yes, I would see that would all be taking place on Salesforce over the live races, the live pledges, etc. In terms of historical, what does historical mean? I think we've got an opportunity in terms of the use of OData that I propose to within the data warehouse pre-format a number of data sets which would answer common questions, and then have those exposed as external objects. I think if they want to get very sort of what if type reporting, sort of analytical type stuff, then I would see that would take place directly on the analytics platform. And question?
Yeah, and I'm just kind of leading into, at the end, they need to be able to do all of this reporting from a mobile device. And so I'm just kind of curious how you then tie that in.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's a little bit it's a little bit unclear as to just how in-depth they could get in terms of doing reporting. So, if it's standard reports or reports using external objects, that certainly would be possible on a mobile device. The experience might be a little bit suboptimal. I think there's an opportunity here to look for a BI tool. So, it's Salesforce. So, I mean, Einstein Analytics could be a good fit here, and they provide a mobile app. So maybe it's not the same mobile app, but if they're looking to do more demanding, drill downs, etc., then I think that would be the way that I would tackle that.
And how would you handle too much data being returned to the mobile app in those reports?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the way in which we allow them reporting, it might be that we don't give them reporting access to directly over the race entry. Perhaps again, here is another opportunity for summary custom objects or custom objects to be used. It may be that the external objects are actually the common way that we would do that. And so the race data will be updated to the data warehouse in near real time. I think again, it's a bit general. So if there's concerns about blowing the storage on a mobile device, I don't see that happening actually. I think the standard reporting display would take care of that. It's really around what type of specific reports are they asking for, I think.
All right, same page, second from the bottom, just where we were talking about duplicate racer information. You had articulated a custom solution for how that was going to work. And I'm just kind of curious about what trade-offs and considerations there may have been with the out-of-box duplicate checking.
Yeah, so I think it really comes down to experience here. What we've got is a user who's self-registering through a community. Duplicate rules, could flag up to us that we've got a duplicate record. I would propose to make use of a custom component, with a SOQL query that was able to be more specific, and then we have a better opportunity to manage the next steps with that. I think also there's a consideration from the data privacy point of view about what is the information that we show them. Do we actually show them a list of similar names or whatever it is? So it may be that I'm not reading the requirement quite correctly. I mean, you could certainly achieve it through standard duplicate rules, but I think that the user experience would be suboptimal.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about your ETL and the data. How would you go about making sure the data is optimal for bringing into Salesforce?
Yeah, so we've got our legacy racer databases, which there are multiple versions of, possibly different schemas, different systems. So within the ETL project, we will need to ingest that into a common data model. First of all, we'll need to perform data quality checking. We'll need to do cleanup and deduping of those records. And given that this will be a multi-phase project, that will need to be iterative because we might have racers who've registered in multiple systems. Once we've got a cleaned data set, then as we look to load it to Salesforce in order to optimize that, we're going to have it pre-transformed into our target data model. And then at the point of load, we will deactivate triggers, workflows, etc., in order to speed the load. We'll also conduct the load in a couple of different phases through the bulk API. First of all, we'll load the accounts, and then we'll load the appropriate sets of child records.
And what exercise would you want to perform to make sure the data is going into the right places in Salesforce from the external systems?
Can you be a little bit more specific? Do we need sort of a region key or something like that? Is that what you're thinking?
Just it's part of the process of bringing data in from external systems. It's an exercise that you would perform.
What, in terms of doing a data mapping between our
Yep.
sort of schema? Yeah, so the way I would see that working actually is we would have a common data model within our ETL platform. And then that exercise of mapping will take place repeatedly there as we bring the different systems in, and then we've got our load processes standardized from that point forward. But
yep. Yeah. Thank you.
Would you be able to walk through your data migration strategy going from the racer databases into Salesforce to bring 5 years of historical race information?
Yeah. So I guess, as is indicated here, our ETL process is connected not only to Salesforce, but also to the data warehouse. So we don't want to bring in data which is already historical into Salesforce when it actually would go straight to the data warehouse. So I think that it did call out specifically what those parameters were, but yeah, I wouldn't be looking to load anything which is not relevant into Salesforce. It would go to the data warehouse, and again, there would be a requirements exercise around what the data warehouse schema looks like in comparison to Salesforce, in comparison to the ETL common data model.
Yeah, and maybe you could couple this with kind of your deployment strategy, just around how you would do data deduplication and standardization prior to loading all of that data into Salesforce.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got quite a complex project here, but in terms of being able to test the data migration, as part of that process, we're going to need a number of environments. So we'll certainly need our development environment, which will be used primarily for the work around the Salesforce requirements. That will then feed into our integration test. We can then have, this is where so it's the point of integration that we now have our current working build. Then we will need a QA environment, and I think really it's the QA environment here where we can start to also perform our data load. So we'll have our data migration work stream. Here is our Salesforce work stream. So we'll be able to do our initial testing here within QA, and then I would think that this would be a partial copy Salesforce sandbox, and then ultimately we'll want to do full test loads within our full copy sandbox within our UAT environment prior to going to production.
How will you handle developers developing in parallel in different developer environments?
Yeah, so we'll make use of a source code management tool. So, for example, Git, in order to have within developers, they will be working on feature branches. They will then check those in, and they will be pulled into the main dev branch and assembled within the Salesforce integration environment, which would be a dev sandbox or a dev pro sandbox. Once we've got a working build there, that can then be promoted and pulled into the QA environment. If at any point we find that we are getting any errors, then those will be logged within a bug tracking system such as Jira and assigned back to the relevant developer, who will then fix on their appropriate feature branch and push through again.
So do you suggest automating that process?
I think from the point of QA onwards, there's certainly an opportunity now to use continuous integration. So this could either be achieved using one of the popular continuous integration servers like CircleCI or Jenkins, or we may want to make use of a specialist Salesforce product like Capado or the other one that I can't remember the name of, in order to push that through each of the environments. Once the source has been committed, once the release has succeeded in production, we can then move the head of the dev branch on in order to ensure that the users also can pull back the current source image in order to make sure that their development branch still works.
Yeah, I think you were looking for Salesforce DX.
So I think given this enterprise project at this point in time, I wouldn't be promoting the use of Salesforce DX, Scratch orgs, and source format. I think the rationale for that would be staying with the existing metadata API format for the time being, given that there's better tooling support, whether it be the old-fashioned ANT processes, but also the third-party tools out there. Many of them don't yet support DX source format. In terms of the way that developers work, we can make use of the numerous developer sandboxes that are available. We can also manage a standard Devil template, which we can then use sandbox cloning for the developers to get started. I think as DX gets more mature from an enterprise point of view, then we can certainly look at switching.
Okay. Yeah, I just thought you said the Salesforce tool. That's why I mentioned it. So sorry if that wasn't what you meant.
Okay.
Thank you.
So with the understanding that there's going to be other countries and regions that are going to be brought in, and then specific requirements around a development team being onboarded in Romania, do you have any suggestions just around any types of business structures that'll have to be put in place to manage this?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the overall project governance, we need to bring together the technology and the business functions in order that everybody works together. So we'll need to sort of start from a central point with our main sponsor, which ideally is the CEO. And then below them, we can have a steerco, which is ensuring that the overall project direction is working correctly. And then from a technical standpoint, we would have need of some kind of a design authority or an architecture review board, whatever we want to call it. But this would ensure that technical standards are adhered to. From a Salesforce point of view, they would be supported by a Salesforce Center of Excellence. And then sort of also at this same sort of level in the governance hierarchy, we can have representatives from our dev teams who would be managing their resources in order to ensure that all aligns. So that's sort of the technical branch, and then we've also got the program board, which would take care of ensuring that there is alignment around business processes and priorities, which reports through the steerco, ideally headed by the CEO.
Okay, thank you.
Can you go into the customer support a little bit and Service Cloud and how you'll handle the chatting with the agents and reporting some issues?
Yeah, exactly. Happy to do that. So on page 8, there's the customer support requirements. There's a couple of things that the agents need to do. They'll be able to need to open cases for every inbound connection, whether that's through live chat, through live agent, or email or telephone. We can make use of omni-channel queue routing in terms of routing it through to a team for the appropriate region. I think there might even be an opportunity to make use of skills-based routing if there's a language requirement, in order that the cases get assigned to the appropriate agent. If they need to take additional action beyond, just sort of logging a complaint, so for example, there's a requirement that they can take a pledge. I think there's an opportunity here to make use of guided action in order to launch a visual workflow that would allow the agent to create a pledge on behalf of the customer. I think we don't also have to think about the PCI compliance requirements there of the agent taking card details over the phone. But let's say that they do, we would make use of that Canvas integration with Dash Pay in order to collect the payment details and debit the donor's card. In terms of when there's complaints, so we'll make use of assignment rules in order to make sure that goes to or goes to the appropriate territory group. So, based on where the case is being reported from, we'll have an assignment rule to send it to the appropriate race coordinator or leader. We've got a requirement where if the racer didn't receive their bib or their frequency tracker, then there's a requirement here to make use of milestones and also escalation rules if it's not resolved within 1 business day. So that will be entitlements, milestones, and an escalation rule if needed. I mentioned live chat for one of the channels that people can come in on. Yeah, 5 years of historic data that was mentioned. Okay, so there's an additional one here around the migration, which actually I'd just like to talk about. So each racer migrated should be checked and populated with their IARA record identifier. So we've got the need of some kind of a batch integration here as part of the ETL process. So I would see that being happening within the ETL system prior to load to Salesforce. We've got the opportunity then to either make multiple callouts to the IARA data, or actually more likely we would contact them in order to get a copy of the data set that we needed and populate that within the ETL in order that we don't hit them with thousands of web requests. Is there anything else you wanted to cover on those?
It's a pretty good overview. Thank you.
So just coming to your data model, I can't quite make it out on the model, but for the waypoint, did you say that that's a master detail to the race?
Yes, so we've got the race here, which is owned by the TRL. It's private. There's a master detail relationship for the waypoints.
Okay. So there's a requirement on page 8, it's the 4th up from the bottom, around waypoints only being visible to everyone on the day of the race. Can you just explain to me how you achieve that?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So I think in that instance, then, so the race is private, and it's originally created by the TRL, and then we give access to the TRC. Obviously, once it's published, the race needs to be visible. So I'm going to revise that because we don't want the waypoints visible. So we'll change that to a lookup. Oh no, actually, we don't need to do that. Sorry, it can stay as a master detail, and then we can change, because it's a custom object, we can change that to specify what the OWD is. So we can change it from being controlled by a parent to be private. And then once that's private, therefore, once we share, we can share the race through criteria-based sharing rule for our internal users, and through a share set for our external users based on their account membership. We might actually need we might actually need an additional redundant lookup there in order to associate the race with particular racer accounts. And then in terms of the waypoints, on the day of the race, the visibility for that would be through a custom Apex without sharing controller for the custom component that needs to use it. Yeah, so just on that, it was on page 6 was the race tracking requirements. So in terms of how the tracking would be possible, so that's the functionality for the visibility of a race that is live, the route, and the progress of particular racers on the route. That functionality would just not be available until the day of the race, and then that custom component with its Apex controller would then be querying the waypoints.
Okay, thanks.
There was also a requirement to for the charities to validate that they are 501c3 and also approve those applications. How would you handle that?
Yep. So their application process I saw happening through web to case or email to case, because we've got a validation process involving a number of steps and a number of people. In terms of how that check is done, let's keep going. In terms of how that check is done, my reading of the requirements is that would be a manual process, but that once the documentary evidence was collected, then an approval process could be initiated off of a process, and I would expect that to be directed to the regional manager in order for them to sign off.
Thank you.
Any more? Beeper went off, but we can, no, I'm tired now.